A billionaire offers help to a homeless woman, but when he sees what she does next, he can't believe it. Jason Carter had everything: wealth, power, success. But when he stops to help a homeless woman one evening, he has no idea that she's about to change his life in a way he never expected. What did she do that left him speechless? And who was she before life took everything from her? Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe one act of kindness can change a life? And if you enjoy heartwarming stories, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Jason Carter's life was one many would envy. At 36, he was a self-made billionaire, successful, powerful, and recognized across industries. His business empire spanned technology, real estate, and finance, and his wealth allowed him to live a life of luxury: private jets, expensive cars, designer suits, and the best of everything. Jason had everything he could ever need. Yet, despite all his success, there was something missing. A constant emptiness he couldn't ignore. He had spent his entire life building his empire. Hard work, determination, and a ruthless mindset had propelled him to the top. But in his pursuit of success, Jason had lost something: connection. His relationships were always fleeting, casual, and ultimately unsatisfying. He was used to being surrounded by people, but he had never let anyone truly close. Trust, he believed, was a luxury he couldn't afford, and so he lived a life of solitude behind his carefully constructed walls. That night, Jason was returning from a high-profile charity gala, the rain pouring down in sheets as he drove through the slick streets of the city. The event had been a typical one, full of handshakes, pleasantries, and meaningless conversations with people who were either seeking his endorsement or trying to sell him something. Jason hadn't been particularly interested in the gala. It was just another stop on his busy calendar, another opportunity to show that he was giving back. But even as he smiled and made small talk, he felt the same emptiness inside. His car slowed as it approached a red light. Jason glanced around, his thoughts still focused on the day's deals and decisions. But then something unusual caught his attention. At the corner near a subway entrance, he saw a woman sitting on the sidewalk, huddled against the cold. Her clothes were torn and weathered, and her face, though partially hidden by her long, unkempt hair, had an air of quiet sadness about it. Jason had seen people like her before, homeless, struggling to survive, but there was something about her that made him stop. She wasn't shouting for attention or holding up a sign. She simply sat there, her posture slumped and defeated. Jason couldn't explain why, but her stillness, the resignation in her eyes, struck him deeply. The light turned green, but Jason hesitated. It wasn't like him to care. People like her were a part of the city's landscape, something to ignore or avoid. But tonight, there was something different. Something inside him urged him to stop, to do something he wouldn't normally consider. He pressed the brake pedal and brought the car to a halt just a few feet from the woman. His pulse quickened as he stared at her. There was no reason for him to get involved. He had a schedule to keep, places to be, people to meet. But despite himself, Jason found his gaze fixed on her. Without thinking, he opened the door and stepped out of the car. He was not sure what he intended to do. He had never been the type to engage with people on the streets. But something about this moment, about this woman, made him act. When he approached, the woman looked up at him, her expression blank but wary. Her eyes were tired, and Jason saw a flicker of surprise in them when she noticed him standing there. There was no pleading in her gaze, no desperation, just a quiet weariness. Jason didn't know what to say. His life was full of deals and negotiations, of calculated words, but this moment was different. It wasn't about business, and he wasn't sure how to approach it. He could tell she wasn't interested in small talk or pity. She just looked at him, almost as if she had given up on people altogether. "Do you need help?" Jason asked, his voice softer than usual. The question sounded odd to him. He was a businessman, not a philanthropist, and this wasn't part of his world. But in that moment, he couldn't ignore the impulse to ask. The woman didn't immediately respond. She took a long, hard look at him, assessing his sincerity. Jason felt the weight of her gaze, and for a moment, he almost regretted speaking. What did he have to offer her? He had no experience with the kind of life she was living, and he had nothing to gain from helping her. Still, something inside him pushed him to say more. "I can take you somewhere," Jason continued. "Get you something to eat, maybe a place to stay for the night. I can help." The woman eyed him, clearly skeptical. Jason had offered help before, but always in the context of his business deals, where everything was transactional. This was different. This was an offer with no strings attached, no hidden motives. "And why would you do that?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Her question was blunt, and Jason found himself momentarily taken aback by the challenge in her tone. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not like this. Jason hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to explain it. He wasn't offering help because he felt guilty or obligated. He just didn't want to drive away, to leave her out there alone. It wasn't something he had planned. It was something he felt. "I don't know," he finally said. "I just saw you sitting here and I couldn't keep driving." The woman looked at him for a long time, as though deciding whether or not to trust him. Jason felt the uncertainty in the air, but he didn't back down. He wasn't used to offering help, but in this moment, he felt compelled to do so. After a pause, the woman slowly stood up, her movements cautious and deliberate. She brushed the dirt from her clothes, though it was clear she hadn't cared much for her appearance in a long time. "Fine," she said simply, "but don't think I'm some charity case." Jason stepped aside, gesturing toward the car. He didn't say anything more. The silence between them was heavy, but there was an unspoken understanding that this was the first step in something neither of them could yet define. They drove to a nearby cafe, the rain still falling heavily. As Jason glanced over at her, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought her here, to this point. What had happened in her life to lead her to the streets? The thought lingered in his mind as they sat in silence, neither of them sure what to say next. When they arrived at the cafe, Jason insisted she order whatever she wanted. She was hesitant at first, her eyes scanning the menu as though unsure if she deserved to choose something for herself. But Jason insisted, telling her to get whatever she needed. After a moment, she chose a warm meal, soup and bread, and Jason silently added it to the order, ensuring that she had enough. As they ate, Jason learned more about her. Her name was Claire, and she had once been a thriving artist, full of hope and ambition, but a series of poor choices had led her to where she was now. She had a family, but they had given up on her years ago. Life had broken her down, piece by piece. Jason listened carefully, his thoughts shifting as he absorbed her story. This woman had once been someone with dreams, someone who had fallen hard but hadn't completely lost herself. There was something in her, something that Jason hadn't expected to see. Despite everything, Claire still had a flicker of hope. By the end of the meal, Jason made a decision. He would help her. She didn't deserve to live on the streets. He didn't know exactly how, but he couldn't let her continue down this path. He would offer her a chance to rebuild her life. The following days after their first meeting felt surreal for Jason. The night he had helped Claire, the homeless woman with the tired eyes, kept replaying in his mind. He wasn't sure why he had acted the way he had, why he had offered to help her. His life, filled with business deals and networking, seemed so far removed from her reality. Yet there was something in her story, in the quiet sadness she carried, that had struck a chord with him. Jason couldn't shake the image of her sitting on that curb, her cardboard sign barely visible under the soft glow of the streetlight. It wasn't the sight of the homeless that disturbed him. It was the vulnerability in her. The sense of someone who had given up not just on the world around her, but on herself. It was as if she had silently decided that life was a battle she could no longer fight. And it didn't sit right with him. He had left the cafe that night feeling conflicted. He wasn't the type of man to get involved with someone's problems. He believed that everyone made their own choices in life, that you could only be responsible for your own success or failure. But Claire's story wasn't just about failure. It was about circumstances, about dreams shattered by things beyond her control. It was clear to Jason that she hadn't given up entirely. There was still something inside her, a spark, a glimmer of hope. And Jason found himself wanting to help her fan that flame back to life. He thought about her constantly, wondering what had brought her to that moment on the street. He knew he couldn't just leave her as another person he had helped in passing. He had made an offer, and he felt a responsibility to follow through. The following Friday, Jason found himself sitting in his office at the top of his building, yet overlooking the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. His phone buzzed, and without thinking, he checked the screen. It was a message from Claire, the first communication since their meeting. It was brief. "Thank you for the meal and the offer. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, but I'm thinking about it. Can we talk?" A strange sense of relief washed over him. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. He typed a quick response. "Of course. Whenever you're ready, just let me know." He stared at the screen for a few moments, wondering what ready meant for Claire. She had lived on the streets for years. Her survival instincts, built up over time, were hard to break. What could he offer her that would make her feel safe enough to trust him? Jason stood up and walked over to the window. The city stretched out before him. Bright lights, busy streets, and people rushing through their lives, each lost in their own world. He had worked hard to build the life he had, but somewhere, in the back of his mind, he knew that all the success he had achieved couldn't fill the void. That was the reason he had reached out to Claire. There had to be more to life than business deals and endless power. The next evening, Jason found himself back at the same cafe where he had first met Claire. He arrived early, not sure if she would show up, but determined to keep his word. He had been thinking about her all week, the way she had looked at him, the hesitation in her eyes. She had come close to refusing his help, but something in her had held her back, just enough to allow him to step in. The bell above the door chimed as Claire walked in. She was wearing the same worn-out coat she had the night they met, but her face was softer now, less guarded. She looked different, like someone who had just begun to open up again. Jason stood and motioned for her to join him at the same table. As she sat down, Claire glanced around, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Jason could tell she wasn't used to sitting in places like this. The cafe was upscale, the kind of place where the walls were adorned with art and the clientele spoke in hushed tones. It was the type of environment Jason had grown comfortable in, but he noticed how out of place Claire felt. "Take your time," Jason said, offering her the menu. "Order whatever you want. It's on me." Claire hesitated but nodded, taking the menu and skimming it briefly. Jason waited in silence, giving her space. It was clear that Claire wasn't accustomed to being treated with this level of kindness, and Jason respected that. He didn't want to push her too hard. She ordered the same meal she had had the first time they met. A simple bowl of soup and bread. Jason ordered the same for himself, and the two sat in silence as they waited. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet. Jason had learned not to rush conversations. He wasn't used to making small talk with people outside of business, but he knew that this wasn't about business. This was about understanding and helping. "So, what's going through your mind?" Jason finally asked, breaking the silence. He wasn't sure if it was too soon to ask, but he needed to know what Claire was thinking. He needed to understand her better before he could offer anything meaningful. Claire looked up at him, her eyes still wary but softer than before. She placed her hands on the table, folding them together as she spoke. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said quietly. "I've never been in a position where someone actually wanted to help me without wanting something in return. I don't know what to do with that." Jason leaned forward, trying to offer her reassurance without overwhelming her. "You don't have to decide anything right now. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to help you get back on your feet. I can offer you a place to stay, help you find a job, get your art back. But only if you want it." Claire stared at him for a long moment. She was clearly torn. Jason could see it in the way she shifted in her seat, the way her fingers fidgeted with the napkin. She wanted to believe him, but she didn't know if she could. "I've been on my own for so long," she said, almost to herself. "I don't know how to trust people anymore. It feels like everyone just takes what they can from you." Jason nodded in understanding. He wasn't asking her to trust him blindly. He just wanted to give her the opportunity to rebuild her life, to rediscover her passion for painting and the dreams she had once had. "Claire," Jason said, his voice gentle, "I'm not asking for your trust right away. I'm asking for a chance. Just one. If you don't like it, you can walk away whenever you want. But I believe in you. I believe you can turn your life around if you want it." The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Claire. After her meeting with Jason, she spent hours turning his offer over in her mind, weighing the pros and cons. On the surface, it seemed like an incredible opportunity, someone willing to help her when the rest of the world had turned its back. But there was so much fear in her heart. She had been on her own for so long that accepting help felt unnatural, almost like admitting defeat. She had learned to survive alone, and the idea of leaning on someone, especially someone like Jason, was terrifying. She couldn't help but wonder why he would help her in the first place. He didn't owe her anything. He had money, power, and connections. His life was the complete opposite of hers, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up to that world. But something about him had made her think twice. He had been kind without asking for anything in return, something she hadn't experienced in years. It was a Tuesday when she finally made the decision. She had been pacing around her small rented room for hours, unsure whether to go to Jason or stay hidden away from the world. She had spent too many years pushing people away to let someone in now. But she had made it this far because of the small glimmers of hope she still clung to. Maybe, just maybe, this could be her chance to get her life back. She reached out to Jason that evening, sending him a brief message. "I'm ready to talk. Let's meet." Jason's response came quickly, as if he had been waiting for it. He suggested the same cafe where they had first met, the one that had felt so foreign to her just a few days ago. Claire agreed, her hands shaking slightly as she put her phone down. She was about to walk into a world that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. When she arrived at the cafe, Jason was already seated at their usual table. He stood up as soon as she walked in, his smile warm but calm, as if he had been expecting her. He didn't say anything right away, but the way he looked at her made Claire feel like he was seeing through her walls. It was unsettling, but somehow comforting at the same time. "Glad you could make it," Jason said, gesturing for her to sit down. "I was hoping you'd come." Claire sat down slowly, her nerves still on edge. She hadn't been sure of what to expect, but Jason's calm demeanor put her at ease. She felt like she could finally breathe again, even if just for a moment. "I've been thinking a lot about your offer," she said, her voice tentative. "And I think I want to take you up on it. I want to get back to painting, to living a life that isn't just about surviving." Jason's eyes softened, and for the first time, Claire saw something more than just the businessman in him. He looked relieved, like he had been waiting for her to say those words, but he didn't push her. He simply nodded. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You don't have to worry about anything. We'll take it one step at a time. I'll help you find a place, get you back to painting, and if you're up for it, we'll start looking at ways to get your work out there." Claire nodded, her chest tightening as a mix of fear and excitement swirled inside her. She had spent so many years wondering if she would ever get to live a life she was proud of again. Now, with Jason's help, it seemed possible. "I don't know where to start," Claire admitted. "I've been out of the game for so long. I've lost my confidence. I'm not sure I have what it takes anymore." Jason's expression softened even further. "That's why I'm here. You don't need to do it alone. We'll work together." For a moment, Claire allowed herself to believe it. She allowed herself to dream, to imagine what it would be like to not just survive, but to truly live again. But then the reality hit. She wasn't the only one who had a past. Jason had a past too. The man sitting across from her had built an empire from the ground up, and with all his wealth and success came secrets, decisions that had shaped him into who he was today. Claire didn't know much about him, only that he had a reputation as a shrewd businessman and philanthropist. But what else was there? Why had he chosen to help her, someone with nothing to offer in return? Before Claire could speak, Jason looked at her, his expression more serious than before. It was as if he had read her mind. "You probably have questions about me too," Jason said, leaning forward slightly. And you're right to ask. I haven't exactly been open about myself. Claire raised an eyebrow, curious now. She had wondered about his motivations, but she hadn't expected him to bring it up so openly. It was a small gesture, but it told her that he wasn't hiding anything from her. He wasn't asking for her to blindly trust him. He wanted to be transparent, and that felt different than anything she had experienced before. Jason paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. I built my empire on ambition, Claire. But it wasn't just business deals and money. I've been involved in helping people. People who have fallen through the cracks like you. My company's investments aren't just about profit, they're about creating opportunities for those who need it most. I've been doing this for years, helping people get back on their feet. But no one knows that side of me. I don't talk about it. People think I just care about business, but I've never been about that alone. Claire stared at him, taken aback by his honesty. It was hard to reconcile the image of the powerful billionaire with the man who had quietly dedicated himself to helping others. She hadn't expected him to be so open, so vulnerable about the part of his life that didn't align with his public persona. So why me? She asked quietly, still unsure of the reason behind his sudden generosity. Why did you choose to help me? Jason leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant for a moment as he thought about his answer. I've seen people like you before, Claire. I've met artists, entrepreneurs, people who have lost everything because of circumstances beyond their control. But there's something about you that made me stop. You're not asking for pity. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. And I see something in you, potential maybe, or just the desire to fight for something better. That's why I'm here. I believe in giving people a chance when they don't believe they deserve one. Claire felt a lump form in her throat as she processed his words. She had never felt so seen, so understood by anyone. She had lived in the shadows for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be noticed for who she truly was. Jason hadn't just given her a meal or a place to sleep, he had given her a lifeline. And with that lifeline, Claire realized, came a chance to believe in herself again. The days following their meeting were a blur of new beginnings for Claire. Jason had provided a steady, reassuring presence, helping her find a place to stay, and even arranging for her to have access to an art studio where she could begin working again. She had started to paint, tentatively at first, but with each stroke of the brush she could feel her confidence building again. The life she had left behind, the dreams she had once harbored, were beginning to take shape once more. Jason's support felt like a lifeline, and Claire tried to wrap her mind around it. He had opened doors for her, more than she had ever dreamed possible. But there were still moments when doubt crept in. She had been let down so many times before. People had come into her life, made promises, and then left her with nothing. What if this was just another example of someone helping her with an agenda in mind? What if, after everything was said and done, Jason expected something in return? But those moments of fear were rare, and slowly, as time passed, they faded into the background. Jason didn't act like others had. He wasn't trying to get something out of her. He wasn't using her. And slowly, Claire began to trust him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to start opening up in ways she hadn't in years. But just when things seemed to be falling into place, Jason's past reappeared, knocking on the door of their fragile new reality. It was one evening, a few weeks after Claire had begun her work in the studio, when Jason arrived at the apartment, his face more serious than she had ever seen it. He was carrying a briefcase, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity that made Claire nervous. "Jason, what's going on?" she asked as he walked in, the smile he usually greeted her with nowhere to be found. Jason set the briefcase down on the counter and took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I've been trying to keep this from you, but I can't anymore. My past, it's catching up with me." Claire felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Jason ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "A few years ago, I made some choices that I'm not proud of. I had to make some deals that weren't exactly legal. I wasn't involved in the criminal side of things, but I worked with people who were. I knew it wasn't right, but I thought I could control the situation, that I could keep things clean. But it turns out I didn't have as much control as I thought. Claire's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had feared, when the person she had started to trust would reveal their darker side, a side that couldn't be ignored. "Jason, are you telling me that you're involved in something illegal?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason shook his head. "No, not anymore. I cut ties with those people years ago. I've tried to do things the right way since then, and I've worked hard to rebuild my reputation. But the things I was involved in, they're starting to resurface. There are people from my past who want to hold me accountable for decisions I made." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure what to say. Jason had helped her so much, given her a chance at a life she had nearly given up on, but now she was seeing a side of him that scared her. She didn't want to be part of something dangerous. She had already lost too much. "Who are these people?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do they want from you?" Jason's expression darkened. "They want money. They want me to pay for the mistakes I made, and they're threatening to expose everything I've worked for. I thought I was done with them, but they're not done with me." Claire sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had trusted him. She had allowed herself to believe that maybe she could start fresh, that maybe she wasn't as broken as she thought. But now she was faced with a harsh reality. Jason wasn't just someone offering a helping hand. He had a past that she wasn't prepared for, and it had come back to haunt him. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I care about you, Claire. I can't let you get caught up in this. I need to fix this on my own." Claire looked at him, her mind racing. "You're saying they'll expose you? And me?" Jason nodded. "They won't stop until they get what they want. If they can't get the money, they'll ruin everything I've built, and they won't hesitate to drag anyone into it, including you." Claire stood up, feeling the rush of adrenaline pumping through her veins. "So what do we do? Do we just give them what they want?" Jason shook his head. "No, I'm not going to let them control me anymore. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I won't let them take it all away. I'm going to fight this." Claire's heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of fight. She had spent years trying to stay invisible, to avoid conflict, to protect herself from people who would use her. And now Jason, the man who had given her a chance at a better life, was asking her to step into a world of danger she didn't fully understand. "I don't want you to do this alone," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm with you. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I won't leave you. I won't go back to that life I had." Jason looked at her with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You don't have to get involved in this, Claire. You've already been through enough." But Claire shook her head. "No, I've been given a second chance because of you. I can't just walk away from this now. We'll face it together." Jason stared at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. Claire was resolute. In that moment, they both realized that this was no longer just about her or him. It was about what they could face together, no matter how dark it seemed. The next few weeks felt like a blur of uncertainty and tension. Jason had taken steps to shield Claire from the worst of it, keeping her away from the worst of the threats and ensuring that she was safe. He hadn't wanted her to get involved, but she had insisted on standing by him. For the first time, Jason was forced to face the consequences of his past, and in doing so, he realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. They spent their days working together, figuring out their next move. Jason's contacts from his business world had helped him make some headway, gathering information and legal advice. But it wasn't enough to completely neutralize the threat. The people from his past were persistent, and as the days passed, the pressure mounted. They knew Jason's weaknesses and weren't above using them to get what they wanted. Yet, as they worked together, Jason couldn't help but notice the change in Claire. The woman who had once been unsure of herself, hesitant to trust anyone, was now standing by him with more confidence than he had ever seen. She wasn't just a victim of circumstances anymore. She had found her strength, and Jason saw in her a determination that matched his own. It was as if they were no longer just two people caught in a bad situation. They were partners, working toward the same goal. But there was still one more thing Jason had to do. He had to confront his past directly. The people who had been pulling the strings all along weren't just going to walk away. They had been using his past mistakes as leverage, and Jason knew that until he made things right with them, they would continue to haunt him. "I need to go back," Jason said one evening, sitting in the living room with Claire. "I can't keep running from it." Claire looked at him, concern written across her face. "Are you sure about this? You don't know what they're capable of." Jason nodded. "I know. But if I don't face them now, it'll never stop. They'll find a way to destroy everything I've worked for, and everything you've worked for. I won't let them do that." Claire's eyes softened. "I understand, but you don't have to do this alone." Jason looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I know. I don't deserve your support, Claire, but I'm glad you're here. I don't know how I would have gotten this far without you." Claire smiled, her eyes bright with a mixture of tenderness and resolve. "We're in this together. You're not alone, Jason. You've helped me when I needed it most, and I'm not going to walk away now." The words comforted him more than he could say. They had both been broken in their own ways, yet somehow they had managed to find each other and build something meaningful. Something that was no longer defined by the past. The road ahead would be difficult, but Jason had never felt more certain that they could face it together. That evening, Jason made the phone call that would change everything. He contacted the people from his past, the ones who had held him captive with their threats. It was a risk, but it was a necessary one. He knew that to take control of his future, he had to take responsibility for the mistakes he had made. He arranged a meeting, knowing full well that it might not go as planned. When the day of the meeting arrived, Claire insisted on coming with him. Jason hesitated at first, but she was determined. She had already proven herself capable of standing by him, and Jason knew she wouldn't back down. He admired her strength, her ability to face the world with a newfound sense of courage. Together, they walked into the lion's den. The meeting took place in a small, nondescript office, in a building that was anything but glamorous. Jason had hoped for a calm, professional conversation, but the moment he stepped into the room, he could feel the tension in the air. The men who had once controlled his fate were there, watching him with cold eyes, as if they were waiting for him to make a wrong move. Jason kept his composure, his gaze steady as he addressed them. "I've made my mistakes," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But I'm done with this. I've built something real now, something I'm proud of. I'm not going to let you use my past against me anymore." The men exchanged glances, and Jason could sense the hesitation. They had expected him to grovel, to beg for forgiveness. But that wasn't who Jason Carter was anymore. He had made his peace with his past, and now he was ready to take control of his future. Claire stood beside him, her presence a quiet but powerful support. Jason knew that, no matter what happened in this room, he wasn't facing it alone. The conversation that followed was tense, filled with legal threats, demands, and back-and-forth negotiations. But in the end, Jason didn't back down. He stood his ground, refusing to give in to their manipulations. And as the meeting came to an end, the men realized that Jason was no longer someone they could control. He had grown beyond the man they once knew. Jason and Claire left the building together, their shoulders lighter than they had been when they entered. The threat had been neutralized, not through violence or intimidation, but through Jason's willingness to face his past head-on. He had taken responsibility, and in doing so, he had gained something far more valuable than money or power. He had gained his freedom. Back at the apartment, Jason turned to Claire, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "We did it," he said, a sense of finality in his voice. "It's over. We can move forward." Claire smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it together." Jason knew in that moment that he had found something that no amount of money or success could ever replace: a partnership, a true connection. They had both been broken, but together they had rebuilt something stronger. Their future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jason felt hope. If you like this story, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy stories that embraces your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Let me know in the comments what stood out to you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.